Welcome back to the second segment of Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. You're listening to Dateline New Haven, about the stories that make New Haven tick. Joshua Perry is one of the more interesting people who make New Haven tick. He grew up here. He's an attorney who is Solicitor General of the state, correct?
That's right.
Which means you argue before the appellate courts.
My team does.
Has the team that when there's appeal for the Attorney General's office. But what I never knew about Josh, and I've known him for years, is that he's also a terrific writer. And he's just published his first novel. It's a real momish novel. It's called Seraphim. And it's a story about a public defender in New Orleans who's trying to bring justice and humanity to what's otherwise just one of infinite numbers of turnstile criminal justice cases in post-Katrina New Orleans. It's about a 16-year-old who has confessed to a prominent murder he didn't commit, and will he and the public defender get justice? And it's a book that came out today, Melville House. The New York Times has already reviewed it, compared it to Richard Price novels, examining injustice in the ways in which it marks those working in and out of the system. It veers off into larger examinations of Jewish faith and mysticism. So for me, Joshua, this is obviously the ultimate the ultimate novel to read, because it's a great story about criminal justice, has great characters, there's a mystery, how's it going to get solved, but also the lead character, the attorney, has all this kind of Jewish
baggage. You can say baggage, Paul.
But also dealing with what Judaism means in his life and what's justice. So, and I call it The Wire meets Treme.
Well, that is very kind, as was the New York Times' comparison with Richard Price. I don't pretend to that. It was a real labor of love.
Did I summarize it right?
I think so, although I think the book leaves open as a question whether Robert did or didn't commit the murder that he's accused of. I'm not sure the book solves that question.
But it's clear, and we don't want to give too much away, but it's clear that there's missing evidence here as part of the story is not being told that could pretty much exonerate him.
That's exactly right. And in the end, and again, I don't want to give too much away either, but in the end, Robert makes a really difficult choice, a choice motivated by loyalty and deep concern for his friend.
And it's not just him. His father makes a choice. The lawyers make a choice. And what's so interesting about this book, and one person, I forget who was commenting on the book, saying that it's really more, it's not like the amazing murder with the reveal that kind of puts it all together. It's not knock on any door. It's what it's really about is how complicated and morally and ethically tricky criminal justice is. The kind of step-by-step, as we through the main character attorney, we're seeing this case unravel, and it's not neat in any way. And everybody's decision, from judges to prosecutors, defense lawyers, to witnesses, to family members, each one's deciding right or wrong about how honest to be, how to go about following the rules or not following the rules. And that's really what I took away from the book.
Yeah, I think that's true to life in most aspects of the justice system as I experienced it and lived it. I was a public defender in New Orleans for 10 years, in the years after Hurricane Katrina. And I never thought my cases were simple or easy. Even the ones, and those are relatively rare, where I thought I knew what really happened. It was always difficult to figure out what should happen next. But one thing that I think is really simple and easy about the justice system is the question of agency. And that's really at the core of the book. Too many public defenders, certainly too many prosecutors, judges, police, think that they are the main characters in the justice system. They're these ministers of justice. And that's how a lot of crime fiction novels go, right?
And especially since so many cases in real life in courts like New Orleans and New Haven, you're really going through 50 people or 30 people an hour and making decisions about their lives in under a minute.
That's right. These are fast.
Because so much gets decided about whether to take a plea and that kind of stuff.
That's right. But what I wanted to do with the book was center the young man who was going through the system and center his experience and his choice and his father's choice. His father is the closest thing the book has to a hero. This is a man who spent most of his life in and out of jail, who's not been the world's most attentive father by his own imagining. But in the end, it's his choice and his agency that offers the biggest possibility of redemption. And that was important to me because my experience as a public defender wasn't that I was some kind of hero or champion, a knight in shining armor standing up for people. My experience was that the strength, the resilience, the bravery in the system, and there's not enough of it, was mostly my clients and their families.
And Joshua, so you wrote a story. A lot of the times, I think this does happen with the first novel someone writes. It's about the formative moment in their life, and you're kind of processing this intense experience. How did you come about as a young attorney to be moving from New Haven to New Orleans to be a public defender after Katrina?
Oh, a series of terrible, terrible mistakes, Paul. No, I'm proud of those 10 years, and they were also a very, very difficult 10 years. So I went to law school to be a public defender. I had a grant coming out of college, and I sat in an apartment in Brooklyn, and I wrote for a few years, like a lot of self-indulgent, privileged folks.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you write?
I had a novel.
Oh, so this isn't your first novel?
It's my first published novel. So I, like a lot of young Jewish men, was getting pressure from my parents to make something of myself. So I was writing this novel. I had the money to do it with, and I figured I should go to law school. And the only reason I could think of going to law school was to be a public defender on the back end. But while I was doing it, as I was also writing this manuscript, I finished the manuscript and I moved down to New Orleans the same week. And I started getting notes back from editors the same week I started practicing law. And I simply put it on the shelf. I stopped answering my agent's phone calls.
What was the novel about?
It was about a man, an immigrant to the United States in the early 1800s, a Jewish immigrant who loses his child to Tay-Sachs disease, and how he makes sense of an illness that, of course, in the 1800s, they couldn't begin to understand. But the immigrants' experience of carrying with them the traumas of the old country was sort of manifested in his body. It was not a novel that I would have written today. But
whatever happened with the novel?
I shelved it. So I started practicing public defense, and I realized I only had the emotional space to do that. I stopped answering my agent's phone calls. I stopped editing it, and I never wrote another word of fiction for 13, 14 years.
So for 10 years, you were day-to-day in turnstile system of justice of people with pretty tough lives having to make decisions. Do you plead guilty to a crime you didn't do or a crime you did, but they might not have the evidence? And you told the story, the main character of the book, Ben Alder, is based on you and your experience. I mean, obviously, you were a public defender there. So when you write a novel processing story, my first question is, how do you decide? I know he's not exactly you, but although like the Alderman is the
it's my family name. Yeah, that's right.
So what makes you decide to do fiction instead of nonfiction to process the intensity of what you experienced in that time of your life?
Because there was no way to tell the truth writing nonfiction. So
tell me about that.
When you take on the representation of a person who is accused of doing something really serious, and you come to meet them at what is for many of them the worst moment in their lives, and you ask them to tell you about the worst thing that they've ever been involved with, whether they did it or not, right? This experience is a profoundly shattering experience for them. The thing that you owe them, without question, is loyalty, and part of that is privacy.
So then when you do it, so you wanted to work out the larger issues that you wrestled with as a public defender, but in a very specific way, the story.
Yeah.
How true to a specific story was this story?
Not. So while I was sketching out the book, I did do some sketches of real cases that I remembered to recapture the feeling of it, my feeling, to recapture something about the environment, the atmosphere, the geography. But I scrubbed those out of the story very carefully. The stories of my clients are not my stories to tell. So the only way to tell the truth in my mind was to write fiction.
And of course, fiction I always felt is hard to write. I'm a terrible fiction writer. I've tried a few times. And that I find that fiction has to be truer than nonfiction in that when you're making up a story, you're asking the reader, once you get past the suspension of disbelief that, no, there are no aliens here or this didn't really happen, you actually have to make them believe within that world that it's happening. It has to sound true. It has to feel true. So I guess you had the advantage here, which that, it was like in the courthouse. You could describe the courthouse. You know what kind of decisions that people make, even you put them in example. How do you protect your clients enough? Because I'm sure when people write this kind of book often from an intense experience, they will draw on real things that happen. People notice that. Did you make a real effort to scrub it so clean?
I tried my best. And I think what you said is true, that you're trying to write the truth of your experience. But I think those last few words are really important, right? You're trying to write the truth of your experience.
So is the public defender truer to you than Robert Johnson, the 16-year-old, and his family was to anyone you dealt with?
Yes, but also I don't fully know. So I think the important recognition that the book has, and Ben experiences this or articulates it very early in the book, is that he can't really know what his client's experience of the justice system is. Part of the book is about the imperative of bearing witness to injustice, and then part of it is about the impossibility of bearing accurate witness to injustice when the suffering is really happening to people who are not you. And I think that's really important for public defenders stepping away from the book to recognize, right? However hard it is for you, you are not the actor, right? You are not the person being acted upon either. And so Ben struggles not just with how to advocate for his clients, but also how to recognize the things that he doesn't know, the limits of his ability.
And what's so interesting is at one point he breaks the law and gets rid of a piece of evidence. That's early in the book, so I'm not ruining anything for you. But it comes back. And he was so sure he was helping his client by getting rid of evidence. In the end, he might have really hurt his client. What's the lesson? Does that fit into your lesson about public defenders not becoming too grandiose about how they're championing justice and they just have to do their job? Was your answer that he shouldn't have done that? And did you ever do anything like that?
I never did anything like that. I absolutely felt ethical quandaries in my practice. But the biggest ethical quandary that you face, and you face it every day, is how to be an effective advocate, almost an alter ego for your client in court, without actually replacing them as a person, without making choices for them. They're the ones who are going to have to, who are in jail. They're the ones who are going to have to do the time. You have to make them, position them to be the deciders. And I think Ben's grave mistake there, and I think Ben is nobody's idea of a hero. Ben's gravest mistake is that he makes this critical decision for his client, and it turns out to be the wrong one.
And why did you leave New Orleans?
I was exhausted. Is the shortest answer. There are practical answers to that. No, my wife was also a public defender. She ran the death penalty defense unit at the Orleans Public Defenders when I was.
Is that how you met?
Yeah, when I was running the youth defense office, which is a separate office, she was representing people on death row or who were accused of capital offenses. And we were tired. We wanted a third child. We couldn't do that under the constraints that we were working under, and also be present, loving parents for our children. There are people who can. There are people who are able to make all those things work. And I wasn't that person. I wasn't resilient enough.
And we're talking to Joshua Perry, author of Seraphim, which is out today. Go get it. It's a terrific book about how the criminal justice system works and the compromises and ethical decisions we make every day. So Robert Johnson is the name of the kid. Was that deliberately because of the blues singer?
That's exactly right. None of the characters in the book have their real names, right? So Ben...
What do you mean they don't have the real names?
Well, so Ben tells everybody a story about his clients, and he talks over and over about how you develop these stories of exoneration or mitigation.
And I love that the riffing that takes place in the book with him and his friend Boris, the other Pasternak, the other attorney, how they immediately riff on what kind of story you can tell, whether or not it's true based on the info you have.
But even when they talk to each other, and when Ben talks to a woman who he falls in love with later in the book, he doesn't use his clients' real names. He gives them all fake names. And Robert Johnson is the fake name that he gives to the protagonist in the book.
Oh, so even within the book, that's not supposed to be his real name.
That's exactly right. There's a moment where...
And you play guitar, so is that why you play Robert Johnson songs? Like
I love blues music, but of course I do, right? I'm a, self-indulgent, narcissistic Jewish guy from the Northeast. Of course I love...
Which is like 97% of Robert Johnson's Delta Blues audience.
Of course I love this music that feels authentic to me. But that's part of Ben's internal struggle also, right? Is he wants to be part of a world that is not his world. And he's forced to be part of a world that's not his world.
And one was interesting is the theme of fathers. So one thing that really interested me in the book is you talk about, you show us conversations between clients and witnesses and family members with the public defender. The public defender isn't always being honest about what he's trying to accomplish. And one fact, you have one point where he's trying to get information that's going to hurt one of the people he's talking to. And everyone's always weighing the public defender. Who are you? Are you going to help me or not? Yeah. Robert, the father, the mother, the witnesses. And one big question is father. So early on, they're testing him to tell you about, are you a father and your kid? And Ben lies. He says he has kids when he doesn't. And Ben's struggling with his own father committing suicide. And what I wondered what you were trying to get at about, because there was also a relationship with Robert and his father, absent fathers. What were you wrestling with there about fatherhood in this book?
Ben is somebody who has put himself in the position that could be mistaken for a kind of a surrogate fatherhood with a lot of these young people, and he and Boris only represent children.
But of course they can't be fathers.
But of course they can't, right?
But why does he lie about being fathers? Does he think they'll relate to him?
He tries to find ways to relate to his clients who are so different than him in so many ways. And this is a real struggle that real public defenders confront. You want your clients to trust you. You almost need your clients to trust you in order to be an effective lawyer. But there are so many valid and important reasons for them not to trust you. Think about somebody in Robert Johnson's position, right? 16 years old, poor, black, the victim of racism your entire life. You've been through trauma. You were displaced, right? Whether or not, I don't even care for these purposes about whether you did what you're accused of doing, right? Robert grew up surrounded by violence in a city infected by violence, comes into court on the worst day of his life. And he meets this 30-year-old law school educated Jewish dude from the Northeast, right? Who on the surface and also internally has so little in common with him. And as a public defender, you're constantly trying to build trust, build a rapport, but there are so many reasons for your clients not to embrace you in that
Can
way.
you build trust by lying?
I think Ben learns that the answer is no, right?
Because you know what interested me about this?
Because he lies to his partner too. And that partnership falls apart also.
And one thing I noticed, and tell me if this represents something that reflected something that happened in real life when you're a public defender. Seemed really important to Robert, the 16-year-old, to know about Ben as a father. So he repeatedly asked it, as did his own father with Ben. And I felt there might have been a note of skepticism that he didn't really believe. He was trying to see whether Ben's lying to him. I wondered if I understood that wrong. And I'm not trying to do a lit crit where you can make it up. It doesn't matter if you intended. I wonder what you intended. Were you trying to suggest that he was skeptical because he could pick up that if he could pick up that Ben's lying about being a father, and that's not something he actually can relate to Robert about, can he therefore be my lawyer? Was this actually a sophisticated way for this 16-year-old to probe his lawyer to say, is he telling me the truth?
Look, anybody who has been or has had adolescence knows that they are excellent detectives. That's exactly right. They're excellent at it as a rule, right? And yeah, I think it's true. Certainly it was my experience that a lot of my clients very quickly understood what I was not being fully transparent about and what I was trying to tell them the full truth about. And you learn very early as a public defender not to promise things you can't deliver.
Did
not
they
to
ask you
pretend
about
to know
your
things.
family? Were you asked if you had kids? Did this
Often.
happen a lot? Like, how'd you come up with this?
Oh, so I think people want to identify, right?
So did it happen a lot? Were you asked a lot about, do you have kids by your kid?
I was frequently asked about my life outside of that environment. And I think the reason for that is, again, you're asking your clients to trust you, to believe in you as a real person, but you're not giving them anything. You know so much about at least a small slice of their lives. You know the truth about, often, the worst thing that they've ever been accused of doing. And you give them nothing. And it's only natural to want to get something back if you're...
So what questions would they ask you if they didn't ask you about kids?
You know, I walked into a school, a jail classroom once, and all the kids wanted to know all about how I'd been to school, right? Was it like this, right? And the answer, of course, was it was nothing like this, right? And I think as a public defender, it's really important not to pretend, right? To recognize what the difference is, to respect their ability to see your humanity or lack thereof through that difference, right? And to give them who you actually are. And if they choose not to trust that, that's not crazy.
We're talking to Joshua Perry, author of Seraphim, a great new novel. It's out today, and he's from New Haven. It's published by Melville House. What were you reading? How did you decide on the voice? You kind of have a Sam Spade voice. It's a hard-boiled, right, kind of Raymond Chandler feeling to the book. Was that a deliberate decision? Do you always write like that? Did you feel that's what's kind of make it like Humphrey Bogart's in
No, that was a very deliberate decision. I do love the Philip Marlowe
And
books,
I get the feeling that you wrote and rewrote, because when you write that kind of style, you really have to make sure the sentences click. You can't have the extraneous words. You can't have the metaphor that falls flat. You really gotta that hard-boiled, quick conversation between the two lawyers where they're being clever about everything.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that my legal writing and my fiction writing have in common. You want to be really, really economical with your words.
I never see that in legal writing ever.
That's because you only read bad legal writing. But most legal writing is bad legal writing. But concision and clarity is the most important thing.
So what did you read while you were writing this?
So, as I say, I've read all the Raymond Chandler books, but the honest truth was I read almost no crime fiction, and I'm not sure I've ever read anything that could be described as a legal thriller. I don't find courtrooms thrilling at all. I find them absolutely terrifying. It's the most naked exposure to power that most civilians ever see, and I think that's really, really frightening. So I don't read that stuff to relax.
I found when I wrote a book, it was nonfiction, reading books that weren't exactly in that genre actually inspired me a lot if there was something that kind of told me how to write it. Well, would you like to read us a segment from this?
Sure, I'd be
You're
happy
right, because
to.
New Orleans is a big character in this book, post-Katrina New Orleans, and I really enjoyed that. If you turn to page 50, you'll see I marked an excerpt.
Yeah.
This is Joshua Perry reading from Seraphim.
New Orleans is an important character in the book, and on some level the book is a love letter to New Orleans and to the kids that I served and had the privilege of working for. So here's Ben reflecting on the city. Maybe it had been different before Katrina. Maybe it had been the way that beautiful cities are, like a body, organically grown, with hard places and soft, calluses and contours, all joined by durable and flexible fibers and covered over, contained and joined, with a skin that holds everything together and keeps the outside out. It wasn't that way anymore. The remaining houses, both the ones boarded up and the ones making a go of it, with plastic big wheels in the driveway, the concrete slabs, FEMA trailers, sidewalks vanishing into the hungry chest-high grass, like the land on the coast just a few miles away subsides into water. It had lost that proprioception of cities, where each part knows where the others are, that sense that gives things human and built and natural, balance and proportion.
That's well done, Joshua Perry from Seraphim. So Seraphim, I was wondering how you chose that theme and how it fit into your own angels protecting, because I kind of thought this was about saviors, not protecting angels, that Seraphim are. How did you come up with that title?
So Seraphim are the fiery angels of
protect the throne of the
Bible,
Lord.
and they surround God's throne. I always thought that difficult scene from the book of Isaiah was a caricature, a parody of a courtroom scene. You have God literally sitting on a bench, high and exalted. His robes fill the chamber. And all about him are these fiery angels. And the irony of the fiery angel, right, is they are these exalted, powerful beings who literally can't see. Right? In the Bible, they have their wings crossed above across their faces, across their eyes, so that even though they're there all the time, they don't absorb, they don't participate in the divine presence. And I thought the seraphim were a figure for Ben and his partner, the public defenders, who were the ministers of justice who couldn't really see, but much more importantly to me was the figure of the fiery angel representing the children who I served. There are these boys who grow up amid and sometimes perpetrate really terrible violence. They are figures of anger, of wrath, and also of beauty and promise, and ultimately of justice. And it seemed to me that Ben and Boris are not really as much as they sort of brush up against it, the fiery angels of the book's title. It's the kids who Ben and Boris ultimately work for, and I think Ben recognizes this in an epiphany at the end, that if somebody is going to approach the divine throne of justice, it's not him. It's these young people who he works for, who he serves, who he had the privilege of knowing, and that is deeply heartfelt.
Well done, Josh. So you're going on a tour for the book. Where are you going to hit?
There's going to be, I'm going to be here in New Haven. I'm going to be at Becky Synagogue and Barnes & Noble in North Haven at Yale in September. I'm going to be going down to New York, up to Boston, Nashville, New Orleans, Memphis. Wow. It's going to be fun.
That is really fun.
Yeah.
And so is there a place online where people can find out where the dates are?
You know, if I knew the URL, I'd give it to you. But if you Google Joshua Perry Seraphim, you will find it.
And is there another book in the offing? Is this one and done, or are you going to do more novels?
I'm trying to write. I'm spending most of my time doing things like making sure that people can't carry AR-15s in the streets of New Haven. That's my day job. So that's pretty preoccupying right now, but I hope that eventually there'll be another book.
I hope so too, because I had a lot of fun reading this one.
It was great to be here with you.
Josh Perry. The book is Seraphim from Melville House. It's out today, so run and get it. Thanks to Harry Drost for working the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.